I'm Mia Freedman, and this is No Filter. Wil Anderson grew up on a dairy farm, but he didn't want to spend his life milking cows, like his dad and his grandfather, and now his brother. He wanted to become a comedian, so he did. That led to a gig in radio, and that then led to more stand-up, and then some TV gigs. But for everything that we think we know about Wil Anderson, including those people who think he's actually Adam Hills, because the two of them look very similar, there's a lot we don't know. And as someone who's known Wil personally a little bit over the last sort of 15 years or so, even I had a lot of questions about his personal life. And that was the part of the interview that got quite prickly.
Don't talk about it, Mia. You know I don't like talking about my private life.
It was a bit of a surprise to me, some of the things that he said. Wil and I do have history. We sort of circled each other for a long time. When I was single, I had a crush on him. And then I can't speak for him. Maybe he had a crush on me, I don't know. But we were never single at the same time, so nothing ever happened. But yeah, it was still a really interesting experience to sit down and ask him questions. There are a few different Wils that you get. You get Wil that can be kind of manic, often when he's promoting something or when he's on radio or when he's doing his stand-up. It's a kind of a high energy on Wil. You also get that Wil on TV, on Gruen, on Glasshouse, where he's incredibly fast, incredibly sharp, incredibly funny. Then there's a more low-key Wil, which his legions of podcast fans will know very well. He hosts 4 podcasts: Tofop, Fofop, both of which we talk about in this interview, Wilosophy, and 2 Guys, 1 Cup. So he does a lot. He also lives between LA and Sydney. And I had a lot of questions about how that works. How does that work with relationships? How does that work with your house? And he's got a chronic illness, something that has really impacted on his life in so many ways. Enjoy this interview with Wil. I did. And I think that you'll hear a different side of him. Here's Wil Anderson. Hello, my friend. I've missed you.
It's been a long time, actually. We haven't
so
seen
many
each other
years.
In ages.
No. And I was thinking about you, and I was thinking that I owe you a thank you for when my television career imploded and I was kind of on my ass and humiliated publicly and expecting I consoled myself with the fact that at least now everyone knows I'm available for employment, and the phone will ring, and the phone didn't ring except for you, and you said come on and do a weekly segment on my radio show with Limo in the afternoon at Triple M.
Well, I knew that's the only time we could ever get you. Rock bottom. That's what I was waiting for, Mia. I was like the Warren Buffett of the entertainment industry. I needed the market to crash, and then I was going to swoop in, get my hands on those valuable stocks and see, look what you've become.
It's true.
I really should have got in your ear and gone, I'll guide you here.
I thought you meant that the only time you could get me was in the afternoon. I was like, no, I was free all day, every day, every single day.
Our show was just in the afternoons.
And that was when I started Mamma Mia. So I'd be literally at my tracksuit pants all day, all week. And then once a week, I'd put on some proper clothes. And I'd come in. I think I was pregnant as well at one stage.
I mean, we did it for long enough that at some stage you were probably pregnant. So yes.
And then we kind of lost touch, and you moved overseas.
Well, yeah, kind of. Like, I mean, really, the story.
Well, you did Gruen.
Yeah.
Which is phenomenal, and you're still doing. Well, you've just finished another series.
It's amazing that we're still doing it. I mean, it's that. So my life changed a lot. And this is the kind of interesting thing about your career is that you just don't really know. Yeah. You know, I've been lucky enough that people always talk about this idea of like show business being the rejection business, right? It's the thing that you hear all the time is you're going to hear no, or you're going to have things not work out more often than they do work out. But the weird converse or whatever inverse to that, I'm not sure what exactly I meant to say there, but the weird opposite thing to that is occasionally, if you're just lucky a couple of times, you don't actually have all that in your life. And I've just been lucky enough in my life that like 3 people said yes. And that has kind of changed my life in immeasurable ways.
Who were they and what did they say yes to?
Well, I mean, I guess the first time was whoever said yes to me being on Triple J on the radio.
Yeah.
I mean, as a first job in the media.
How old were you when you were doing Brekkie Radio with Adam?
25, I think, when I started. 25 or 26, yeah. I finished when I was 30, so I must have been 25 or 26. And that job really just set up the rest of my life in some ways. I mean, it's
because one thing led to the next, led to the next.
It gives you an opportunity to be in the main game and talk to the main people, and have people come across your work and have a forum every morning of your life to make a myriad of mistakes. I mean, I talk to people all the time about how luckily timed my career was. We came at a time before there's tapes of any of that stuff. You can't listen
before
back.
The internet.
Before the internet. I have stand-up kids these days like messaging me their first set going, I've put it up on YouTube, check it out, what's your advice? I'm like, here's my advice. Take it off YouTube. I don't want you to see anything I did in the first 15 years.
Yeah, right.
And even then, I'd hesitate to be in the same room while you were watching it.
It's a bit like sex, isn't it? Like, we got to have sex. Well, not you and I, but we
I'm
as
just
a generation.
Clip that out of context.
We got to have sex at a time when there wasn't internet porn. And I'm sure you'd seen pornos before you had sex, but like, you want to be able to just have sex and work it out. You don't want to have all of this sex that's out there before you have the sex.
I mean, imagine you'd never go for a jog if all you'd done is watch the Olympics up until that point.
Yeah.
I'm glad there's no recorded evidence.
And comedy's changed too, hasn't it? It's, what was acceptable 15 years ago or even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, you wouldn't necessarily say now.
Oh, I mean, there'd be stuff that I said in the first couple of seasons of Gruen that I wouldn't say now. So I was lucky that I got Triple J, and then that kind of led to Glass House. And again, it was just a thing that went for a long time. And, we did 216 episodes or something. So.
Yeah, but you say, I was lucky, and, it sounds a little bit #gratitude, #so blessed. Like, you worked bloody hard and you were bloody good. You don't just get to stay on Glass House for all those years because someone said yes to you one time. It's because you worked incredibly hard to maintain the standard and the quality, no?
I mean, yes and no. Both of those things can be true at the same time, I think, which is that I also think that anybody else in the same situation would have worked as hard and, tried as much. And, I mean, I was surrounded by people on that show who were working as hard and trying as much. So I think that what I'm trying to say is, of course, like all this takes hard work to do. And, part of the reason that it has gone reasonably well for a long period of time is that when I have been given these opportunities, I have then worked very hard to keep them or maintain them or honour the fact that somebody gave me this opportunity. But you still have to be lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time for that opportunity to fall in your lap. And a lot of the time, people credit you with some sort of foresight when it's actually just luck or gut instinct. I mean, Gruen's the classic example, which is why we started talking about this. But, honestly, when Andrew and I first had lunch about Gruen.
This is Andrew Denton.
Yeah, it was at the Bondi Trap on Campbell Parade. And we went for lunch, and I had said after Glass House finished, because we'd done 216 episodes in 6 years.
Of a panel comedy news and current affairs show.
And while I was doing breakfast radio, and while I was touring as a stand-up comedian, and while I was definitely not getting enough sleep on the weekends and all those
for those
sort
who
of
remember
things.
Glass House, which I was lucky enough to be on a few times and which I adored doing, but it seemed like, you and Corinne and Husey just turned up and kind of just sat around and shot the shit for half an hour, but it was incredibly tightly scripted, incredibly carefully produced, and there was a lot of leeway in there for, you in particular were very quick and able to be very spontaneous, but a lot went into it, a lot of work went into it, right?
Yeah, it was the hardest, it was a crazy hard thing to do, and we would shoot because we were on a budget. We were always in trouble. We were made on basically no budget.
And you do 2 episodes every 2 weeks?
And we do 2 episodes every 2 weeks. So often,
which sounds crazy now when you think about the news cycle.
Right. I mean,
you did.
We had an episode that never went to air because in the week between when we recorded it and the week it was meant to go on air, 9/11 happened.
Oh God.
So we would have had an episode air in the week of 9/11 with a monologue that started with me going, "Well, it's been a big week. How about those Wiggles?" So that one never went to air. Which I thought was a pretty good choice. To be honest.
I mean, the thought of that now is just, you look at the new genre of comedy shows, the Trevor Noah and the Seth Meyers and John Oliver and Samantha Bee, and I mean, Samantha Bee and John Oliver are weekly, but those guys are fast. I was reading about the producers also saying how Trump has just affected the comedy news cycle and how it's just so fast. The demand is so fast.
It's crazy. Like I'm about to go on this like massive tour, and I wanted to write. Critically Wil is the name of it. Touring all over Australia.
I've got a list of all your shows. I want to read the names of them. Wait.
But so Critically Wil is the one I'm writing at the moment, and obviously you can't be a comedian like me and not write about the world in which what's happening with Donald Trump. But at the same time, it presents you such a problem in Justin, my best friend Justin Hamilton, had to message me the other day. He said, "Did you see John Oliver on Sunday night?" Because I had just written an entire piece about the idea of false news and Trump and facts. And John Oliver then goes on on television with this brilliant 27-minute piece written by 12 Harvard educated comedy professionals, and you just go, well,
over a month.
There goes that bit. And you really do sit around and go, well, how in this world can you talk about it?
Something
because
that's
you have
changing
to talk about
hour
it.
by hour.
And it's the only thing on in the world at the moment. So you have to talk about it. But how do you talk about it without talking about it? And that's when I think you get to a more interesting place that I think comedy will get out of Trump. At the moment, like, honestly, this place is a terrible place. Like, Trump was funny for a while for comedians. The gift of comedy that everyone seems to think he is. He's not. He's beyond satire, and I think that comedy in a lot of ways, this Saturday Night Live shit and all that sort of stuff, I think it actually benefits him. It's all he wants. He is the lead character.
But don't you think comedy is the most powerful weapon we have in the resistance, because it is what gets under his skin, because the one thing he can't handle is being humiliated and being mocked. Yeah,
I disagree though. I reckon it plays straight into what he wants. I think the best comedy is going to be about what he's saying and the issues. Doesn't matter that he's got, a dumb haircut and, he paints himself orange and all this sort of stuff. That's the distraction. We've been distracted by making him look like a comical buffoon on television. You think of Trump and you think, oh, comical idiot. Not like really dark, terrible person who might majorly change the world in a substantial way. And minorities, even if I personally as a white, straight, rich man might not, directly see any, but there's going to be cost to so many people through the things he's not a buffoon. He's not a comical character. I don't want to think of him as, Alec Baldwin playing him on Saturday Night Live, because I actually think that gives him cover. Like he's not some sort of, like he's a buffoon rather than he's genuinely evil or genuinely doing evil things. Or at the very most generous, that he's decided just to con America out of its money and as much as he can for brand Trump.
I want to read the names of your shows because they're just quite genius. Diet Life.
Solo show, Diet Life.
Diet Life. Then I Am the Wilrus.
Yes.
Then Willennium and Terra Willius.
Yes.
So 2 in 1999.
Yes.
Who Wants to Be a Willionaire? Wheel of Fortune. Will by Mouth, Jagged Little Will, License to Will, Kill Will, Will Communication, Will of God, Bewildered, Willosophy, Willful Misconduct, Man vs. Will, Willarious, Goodwill, Willuminati, What You Talking About Will, Political Will, Free Will, Fire at Will, Critically Will. What's Critically Will about? How would you describe it?
I don't know yet. Like, is the 100% correct answer? Like, I'm in the process now of finding out exactly what it's about. But I think it's a show about the world that we live in now without mentioning Donald Trump. Is kind of what the show is about. It starts, really these times and what is going on, in America, but, more generally in the world, is something that kind of a whole bunch of things that have been thematic in my life have kind of perfect stormed, in that, like, firstly, I'm a person who, loved journalism, journalism and has always been a newspaper reader and has been dismayed to see the decline of mainstream journalism, particularly, worldwide really. And, the desperation and how we as consumers also are responsible for that. We were just much more willing to click on the sensational headline than click and read the other stories that keep decent journalism alive, and what role we have to play in that, and certainly what role advertising plays in this. The idea that we've raised now an entire generation on advertising and aspiration, and that things like that, lead to things like Donald Trump and lead to us being more interested in being famous than what we're being famous for. And this rampant consumerism that it's attached to that is the thing that is now destroying our environment, and is like at this information, with the internet, we're the generation that invented a machine that was meant to solve all of our problems and instead narrowed our minds. And I live half of my year in America and I live half of my year in Australia. I'm an immigrant there. I tour there. So all those things I'm interested in, in themes that have been through my work, if people have seen me before, which is about the nature of truth, because I myself, often talk on stage about how I'm an unreliable narrator. I tell stories the best way for people's entertainment. As Billy Connolly said, it's not a documentary or there'd be a guy up here building a fence. We're storytellers. But then as an artist, when you're writing a show like this that has themes like this, you then start to confront yourself with what's my responsibility as an artist to the truths and the way that I portray things, and where do I fit into this as well? So then it becomes thematic about that, and I think I might be able to hook the whole story around. When I was growing up, I lived in the tiny little place I was from where I never thought anything exciting happened.
On the dairy farm.
One of our neighbours was Australia's greatest ever con man. He was a guy called John Friedrich. He stole $300 million from the National Safety Council, and it all happened in my high school years. I used to catch the bus to school with his kids, and he wrote this book called Codename Iago, where he claimed he was like a CIA operative and all these sort of things. So it's a story of a con man and me growing up, living near a con man that I think might have parallels, about the idea of truth and the world we live in. And so at the moment, I think that's kind of what the show's about.
Brewing.
But
yeah, I've heard you talk about it on your many, many, many podcasts about it being the biggest show you've ever done. Is that based on how many dates and how many venues and how many places you're going to perform it in?
Yeah, all those things. I kind of set myself this year for... I was like, I want to write something that, I always want to write something that's the best thing that I've ever done. I always want to do that, of course. But I also understand that I'm 43 now, and there are so many good people in comedy now. I look around, I do these shows, I am constantly inspired and admire, the next generations of comedy. And I'm hyper aware that in comedy, eventually your time is over, and rather than more people coming to see you, at some stage there will be less people coming, fewer people coming to see you. And so I think what I wanted to do with this year was if this was it, if this was the last time you got to say something in front of a whole bunch of people, what would you want to tell them about you? What would you want them to know about the way that you see the world and where we are right now? There's all these things that I think that I am firstly very passionate about, but secondly, I think that I can be funny about. I hope that I can be funny about, but I also hope that perhaps, I've talked about growing up on the farm before, and I've talked about things like that. So for years, I haven't really revisited much of that material, because when I first started, that was a lot of what I talked about.
Yeah.
And as I've gone on, distance from that, it feels like I'm talking about someone else.
More with Wil in a moment, but first, a message from our sponsors who we adore. More with Wil in a moment, but first, a message from our sponsors who we adore. You mentioned being 43. I was going to ask you, you and I used to be the youngest people in the room. I was the ingenue. You were the kind of rebellious young kid, even when you weren't actually, you were 25, but still you. And now, I don't know about you, but often I'm the oldest person in the room. How, as a comedian, how does that make you feel in what you do? Do you feel like an older statesman? Do you feel like you're becoming irrelevant? Bit of both?
Always you feel like, luckily I still am the coolest person in the room. So.
I said oldest, not coolest.
No. Look, I've been lucky enough that I have actually been able to I haven't had to properly sell out yet, which gives you a little bit more, because what
do you mean by selling out?
Well, in comedy, there's a point where you'll take some job that you are better than.
Like what?
Well, I mean, most of them, to be honest. Like most of the jobs in like Australia that
Do you mean like
pay
hosting
you money,
a TV show?
Yeah, any of that sort of stuff.
Area.
You'll get offered a million of them. And I have no problem with anyone who does them because, like, you know what? If you're going to send your kids to private school or whatever, no one else is going to give you that money for anything else that you have skills to do.
Also, you earned it.
Right. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
But I've just been lucky enough that I've had enough things on that I haven't had to kind of do one of those things, which gives you a little bit more cred. The only reason I bring it up is with the younger people, it gives you a little bit more cred. Because what happens is, like on the scene, because I've always been on the scene, you get a little bit more, leeway. You don't feel like some blow-in that they only know off the TV who's popped down to the room to try some material.
Is that why you walked away from commercial radio?
Oh, no. It wasn't the only reason for sure. But yeah, it was definitely, it was one of the reasons, I guess.
Because you didn't want to make that much money.
Yeah, no, the money was good. I like the money. No, I mean, look, to be honest, like, I reckon there's some great...
You could have had a very cruisy, happy life.
But there's also some great commercial radio. Like, I reckon there's times when I listen to, say, Eddie Maguire's show, which will be... I know some people will be like, really, Will? Eddie Maguire? I mean, Eddie knows that I disagree with him a lot. Often I disagree with Eddie, but I like him a lot as well. I think he's a genuinely nice person, and I think he has great intentions, and I think he does do a lot of really great work, like a lot that he doesn't get the credit for, and occasionally he really fucks it up.
I completely agree.
And we've discussed that ourselves. And like I used to, one of my shows was called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
Yeah.
So like I used to have a lot of Eddie Maguire, material. And a thing that I'll say about him is that he, probably more than anybody that I've ever met that I've hung shit on that much, is the one who gets it the most. The one who just goes, no, I get it. Never held it against me. In fact, often has offered me opportunities along the way and those sort of things. So, but I listen to his show because I'm also good friends and great admirers of the other two people on the show, Mick Malloy and Luke Darcy, who played for my football team. He's been a long-term friend of mine. But when I'm overseas, it's probably the first thing I listen to every day because it's like what the newspapers used to be.
Yeah,
like if I listen to that 45 minutes of that show because of the way that Eddie approaches the world, because of the way Darcy, because I'm interested in that sport, and then you get Mick being funny along the way, but still bringing you a bit of the news and opinion and stuff like that. I'm just like, oh, great. I know what's going on in Australia and what Australia is looking at in the rest of the world. I can get on with the rest of my day. And, and that's on commercial radio. Yeah, I think they do breakfast in Melbourne,
they do.
So it's like, but I listen to it on a podcast in LA or in, Portland or something. But but it gives me a really nice up-to-date, it's better than me clicking on a news site. I get a kind of a sense of what Australians think. So I think you can still make great stuff within that commercial medium. Unfortunately, what we see more and more of is people not taking those risks. People just going, we'll get someone really great and then we'll just put them, doing something that is well below their capacities. I mean, for example, Dave Hughes, who does great at all the things he does, but I'm a long-term fan and a long-term person who's worked beside Dave Hughes. He has done the opening monologue at the Logies the last 3 or 4 years. Do you remember the Logies was a thing that no one could host? No one. Because you go out at the start and you would die in the worst room in show business and you would die at home.
Yeah.
And then that would be the end of your career, basically, right? Hughesy has smashed it the last 3 years. What, you can't give him a Tonight Show of some kind?
Yeah.
You can't give him something where every week on a Friday night he gets up there and roasts, people in that way and then interviews some or whatever. That's what I look at and go, why is he why have you got him and paid him all this money and then got him to host, a variety show, like a whatever show, a talent show when... You don't need to find another talent. You've literally got the talent.
You've got the talent.
That's the guy.
He's found himself.
Yeah. You don't have to find some more talent. You actually literally hired a talented guy. You saw him at the Logies. He was so good.
But about commercials, you were podcasting before anyone.
Not true, but we've been podcasting for...
You're an early podcaster. I don't even understand the genesis of the names of your podcasts.
No.
Tofop and Fofop.
Well, Tofop...
it's 30 odd foot of something.
Yeah, well, it's not even, but it was based... It was a joke around Russell Crowe's band.
Which was 30 odd foot of grunt.
And then it was The Ordinary Fear of God because he wanted to keep the initials but not the name of the band. Anyway, I know a lot about the music career of Russell Crowe.
Clearly
he was also Russell Rock with a Q when he was in New Zealand. Jeez. Anyway, there's lyrics on the internet.
But so what's Tofop?
30 odd foot of pod was originally, but it was just a funny name. It was just a funny name because we needed a name. And then Charlie, who's my co-host, a
Yeah.
TOEFOP, he left. He got a job on Home and Away, and because he's an actor, and for a while they were just a little skeptical about two guys sitting around talking about Batman and masturbating or whatever. It maybe wasn't Home and Away material.
Whoops, yeah.
But after a while, they just were like,
Didn't care.
it's fine. But anyway, while he was away, I did one called FOFOP.
And what did that stand for?
Well, it was like faux, as in like in a different universe, and so there would be a different guest Charlie every
I got that
week.
bit,
And
but I didn't
so,
know what it stood for.
Yeah.
And then you've got the AFL one.
2 Guys, 1 Cup.
Is that every week? I don't know. It's
During
a
the
sport thing,
season,
right?
we just did a whole episode about the AFL women's. So we just did one kind of pre-season one, but where we chatted all about the new AFL Women's League. But
and then you've got Willosophy,
which is irregular. The difference between me doing Willosophy and not doing it, I mean,
why do you keep trying to quit it?
well, I just can't do it. It just takes
Why?
too much time. I don't have the time to do it. I literally do not have the time to do it. It's hard to arrange. You're asking somebody for 2 hours of their time and to hopefully come in and talk about something that, might be a bit exhausting for them to talk about, by the end of it. And it's been months since I did my last one. It's got to be 3 or 4 months. And people
We did Mark Colvin and then...
people get mad at Briggs, and people get mad at me. Like people just get there's nothing that provokes that they like it, so they're coming from a place of them liking it, but they literally
but it's like, where is it?
mad at me.
Where is it? I want it.
And I say, well, I don't have a producer. I can't coordinate people's schedules. I can't ask someone for 2 hours at a time. It's always been people I know or like who basically bump into,
And I was always very sad that you never asked me.
Well, anyway, let's not get into that. No,
I made you go red.
No, I mean, literally, I booked that thing running into people.
Oh, no.
Literally running into people.
Yeah.
Because otherwise...
And you haven't run into you for a long time.
It was just not something that because I kind of had to explain to people what it is as well and all those sort of things. So it really it just is if I run into somebody and have the time to be able to explain it to them.
Don't want to be too graphic, but one thing that's shocking is that when the baby comes out, if it's a boy, the balls are so big.
Yes. Just massive, and it's swinging. But the thing is, the genitals on females and male babies are so swollen because they've been in fluid for 40 weeks. Yeah. So everything's just a bit in your face, and you definitely notice it. It's one of the first things you say. And the dads are always like, oh, check out that. But it's just common. So common.
So don't brag that your baby's got massive balls, because all babies have big balls.
Exactly. I'm Beck Judd.
And I'm Monique Bowley. Hello, Bump. Mamma Mia's pregnancy and birth podcast.
Coming soon. Subscribe on iTunes or the Mamma Mia podcast app.
You married yet?
No.
You still with Amy?
Don't talk about it, Mia. I don't like talking about my private life.
Are you joking?
No, I don't. I actually don't. I don't. For her sake, I don't really. Yeah, I talk about it on the podcast. People get I don't not talk about it, but I don't talk about it to. No. I mean, I just
You're in a relationship.
People can hear about it on the podcast sometimes, alluded to, but I don't. I remember, it's got to be a long time ago now. Was I at Triple M? No, I was still writing for the Sunday Telegraph or whatever it was, for the the magazine, and I had broken up with my partner, and I wrote a completely unrelated article about going to see a therapist, which actually literally was a completely unrelated article. In fact, the two things that happened, in the nature of you writing articles and stuff like that, it wasn't even in sync. It just happened to be
around that time.
And the piece didn't mention the relationship breakdown in any way, and certainly didn't allude to anything even like that. And what they did was they took my article, my article that was written, by me.
As a column, yeah.
And then put some quotes from it into an article about the breakdown of my relationship. Ran on page 3 of the Daily Telegraph, the newspaper that I was working for. Oh. So they had taken out of context my column and beaten it up into this article about this person. And it essentially looked with exclusive and as if I'd spoken to them. So to that other person in the middle of, what was a relationship breakdown where you're trying to be very, I have chosen this with my life, and I reveal plenty of personal things about myself, but there's also things about myself that if those other people haven't like chosen that life and chosen that world, that I get very defensive about going, well, that's as much as you get to know about that. And a lot of it stems back to this one thing. Because if I'd read it as well, I would have gone,
Oh, that one experience that burnt you?
well, I'm just like, if I would have read it, I would have gone, oh yeah, he spoke to them. Like, you know.
My God, that happens all the time now. Like that's what the
worst.
media, like that's what the Daily Mail does. That's what, that's how
I worked
things work.
for them. I was literally an employee of theirs.
Really?
It was the column that I had sent in for that thing. For that thing. They still printed the column in the magazine.
I've heard you talk about your personal life in your comedy, and I've heard you talk about it on radio.
Nah, not really. I mean, like
maybe a long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. Well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. You can change. You can definitely, like, you know, change.
So there are boundaries that you have now that you perhaps
just
didn't
never.
before.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. But like it's been a long time now. Like, I mean, I literally just don't. It's just like. I'm even careful when I'm talking about my family in how I portray them on stage, because the truth of it is that you can, you know, as a comedian, you can always, like, you know, mock your family or mock your, you know, these sort of things, your kids and whatever. If I had kids, I would be uncomfortable with being one of those people who talked about my children on stage, because they have not given me permission to do that. They have not chosen to do that. And I think that that is an area where I'm just very, very conscious of going, don't bring someone into this that didn't agree to be part of this.
Does that then, as a writer and as a first-person writer, I've had to make those decisions as well, and I've messed that up many times. And I used to always have a rule that as long as I'm the butt of any joke and that no one else is. But, you know, I know what you're saying. I mean, my husband says he hates that I say anything personal because he calls it leaking intimacy. And I think that there's truth in that. But then I'm really torn that part of what I do and part of what you do as a comedian is comment about life and about your experiences in life. And your experiences, if they include parents, being a son, being a partner, being a father, being a friend, how do you not let any of that inform your comedy? Aren't you then forced to have a really kind of censored version of what you can use as
not
material?
at all. I mean, in fact, if anything, it's the opposite. You know, it's like when you know, if you get in a relationship with somebody you like, what you suddenly realize is that all your time clears up because you're not spending any time looking anywhere else. It's the same with that with the comedy. You just go, well, that's not an area of my life that I talk about in that way.
Right.
You
so
know?
it's just very clear.
There's plenty of other ways. I can tell you all about my private life. People know everything about my dogs, my cats. You know, like they know their names. You know, the stories come up. You hear about my health, my hips. You know, where I grew up.
Yeah.
Like there would be plenty of people who don't think, oh God, I'm missing out on Wil Anderson. He never talks about his personal life. I talk endlessly about my personal life.
Yeah,
my entire my entire comedy is fueled through who I am.
Yeah.
But to take out one thing and go, no, this isn't about comedy. This is like my personal life. This is because to that person.
But it's also your life stage, isn't it? You know, whether you're married, whether you're a dad, whether you're not, whether you're single and out using Tinder, actual Tinder. That's, I don't know, it kind of orients someone in the world.
Yeah, I disagree. In fact,
Yeah,
I think we pay way too much. You know, like we kind of cling to that. You know, so
well, women don't have that luxury.
Yeah,
like women are constantly measured and assessed and put in context around those kinds of things. So it's interesting that you can just go, nah.
Yeah, and look, I mean, but I think also in life, we've all got to be conscious to a certain extent, and certainly I can only speak of my experience, and I understand, like, you know, if you are a woman, then this is going to be a harder thing because society judges you to a different standard.
Like even when you're 50 you're after you're going to have kids.
Yeah, and if you're a woman or a person of colour or any of those sort of things. Well, that's the other thing. Like I'm 43 and no one asked me. People ask me.
You know, that was going to be my next question, because I always,
dear God, no.
You're not going to have kids.
Oh, dear God, no.
Because I'm always like, I really want
you
to have kids.
I have no faith in this planet. I have absolutely no faith that you are doing.
Depressing.
Well, I don't. I mean, I don't.
Is it about capitalism again?
I think we're past the point of no return, unfortunately. I mean, how do you bring a kid into this world where, you know, Mad Max Fury Road's going to be a documentary, not like a piece of fiction? I feel like where we are, there are so many kids in the world right now. One of the major problems facing our world is population. Really? I need to bring some other kid in instead of us rescuing one of those kids we're locking up in a cage on Manus Island? I mean, it's just not something. I have no problem with people having children. Obviously, we're all here because people had children. Like my parents had me. That's why I got to have my life. And I am not a person who, like, I mean, I have 4, like my sister has 4 kids. My brother has 2. I love them all. I think kids are amazing. But I don't need kids. What do I need kids for?
But you don't, it's not about need. I don't know if anyone needs kids. You don't want kids.
No.
You don't look at the connection your brother and your siblings have with their kids.
Dear God, no.
You don't think, imagine that.
No.
Imagine a bit of me in the world.
Never.
Or an adopted child who I can shape and teach about the world.
Oh, no, thanks. Like, I don't even know what I think about the world. How could I tell another person, like, what to think about the world when I don't know?
I think you'd be a great dad.
I wouldn't.
I've been
my
hoping
hips
that you
hurt.
would.
I can't bend over.
I
want to be
still
able
was hoping that
I
you'd
want to be
have
able to
kids.
die soon. I want to be able to go away and not care anymore at some stage. Like, once you have kids, that's it, right? Like, that's now I've got
You're all
to
in.
look after them for the next 20 years. I'm already 43. I'm not going to make it to 63 in good shape.
It's not over yet. Tell me about your hips and your osteoarthritis. That's really bad, isn't it? I've got a friend who's got that. It's incredibly painful.
I reckon at about the first. What I mean, I guess.
How long have you had it?
Well, I went to the doctor yesterday actually because I'm going to get some X-rays tomorrow. Because it's probably at the point now where I should get my operations, and so it was probably about a decade. We were trying to work it out, but maybe even over a decade ago.
And it just started with pain.
Yeah, I had 2 years because I'd played a lot of sport and I ran a lot. That was my big thing.
That's
I
right, you're a
love to
runner.
run. Yeah. And I loved running because there's a stand-up always on the road. Running's just the easiest thing in the world, you know. You have a gig you don't like, or you have an hour before your show and you've got off a plane and you need to kind of, you know, you can just like run
Go
20
for a
minutes
run.
that way,
Clears
run
your
20
head.
minutes back, you know. It's great. So I loved it. Ran all over the world and I loved it. And I was having problems. Like my back would be going out and my hips would go out, and I was doing all the things that people do in those situations, which is go to, you know, chiropractors and osteo and physio, all that sort of stuff. Like spent thousands of dollars and, you know, went to some doctors and stuff as well. But no one said what. And again, I do certainly have a bit of that dairy farmer male mentality of like not attending to my medical things in the way that I should, you know. I mean, it's a thing that men traditionally have a problem with, and it's certainly something that, despite all my, you know, more progressive male looks at the life, I feel like that's definitely one where I fall down a bit. I can ignore my own sort of pain or medical stuff. And so I just never demanded of a doctor that I get an X-ray. And so I was going to get all these treatments, but I was never really just going, well, if they haven't brought it up, then, you know, like
so you're a bit
they're the
passive
doctor.
about it. Yeah.
Whereas, like, you know, I've seen a lot of women in that situation who their first thing is being, well, we've got to get an X-ray, you know. And so I did all this unnecessary stuff, or people were, maybe even people who were giving good treatments, but they were giving treatments to the thing that wasn't actually the problem.
Sure.
So I eventually got X-rays. No one had really considered it because it was quite young.
Early 30s.
Yeah, for me to have this thing. But yeah, so I had quite bad osteoarthritis in both hips at that stage.
And that's just luck of the draw.
Well, part of it's genetic. So a small amount of people are born with it, like just a different socket, basically. But really, it shouldn't be problematic unless you do kicking ball sports or karate, anything that takes your leg past the sort of right angle. So then it starts to rub and wear away. So I played a bunch of AFL, Aussie Rules football when I was growing up. And so it's particularly bad in my right, I kicked mostly with my right. But yeah, but then for years I was running on basically bone on bone because it had gone down to bone on bone. But me not knowing that was what was happening, you know, I'm still going for jogs every day and going to the gym and stuff like that. So I was in excruciating pain because basically at that stage I had the bone on bone and all the nerves and whatever. But I was still just going on as if like that wasn't what was happening and getting all these other different treatments and thinking, why isn't this helping? So at that time it was, I'd have days where I just couldn't do anything, you know. But once I stopped, you know, running and, you know, jogging or basically doing anything other than sort of walking, that's all I do now.
That's an adjustment.
Yeah.
Because runners are like, it's in your head.
And also, I mean, you have to then adjust to how do I relieve my stress, you know, like how do I replace, you know, what that was, how do I, you know, monitor my weight, you know, like all those sort of things.
Get your cardio in.
Yeah.
And how do you do all those things?
Well, I mean, mostly I just walk, honestly.
You just walk a lot.
I just walk a lot. Yeah, if I can walk to something, I'll just walk and do it, you know. That, a lot of the time it's just about keeping movement with this as well. Like, you know, so the more you move,
are you still in
the
chronic
better
pain?
you tend to be. I mean, by
other people's standards, probably yes, but by the standards of how bad it was at some stage, like this is a deteriorating, condition. So it just keeps getting worse until eventually you get to the point where, you have to get something done about it.
And what does that mean?
Well, an operation.
But what do they do? Replace your hips?
Yeah. But here's the thing. 10 years ago, that was a really major, complex operation where there was like a lot of, serious side effects or, for the ones that didn't go well, you could have like 6 months out, which I could never afford as a freelancer, I don't have, my
you could
life.
if you monetized your podcast. Anyway,
Right.
go on.
But I don't work in a job where I have sick pay or holiday pay or any of those sort of things.
Sure.
So if I don't work, I don't pay my mortgage. And so I never would risk it, partly because of the career, but partly because they said to me, this technology will develop a lot. And if you can, because what you have to do is
you can hang out.
Right. And so in the old days, you go through your hip replacements about every 10 years as well. So basically what you were talking about was major surgery on each about every 10 years. Now I've waited a decade and
now it's pretty
well, what I'm hearing is that
good.
it is improved. So we now have to find out whether I kind of qualify for, the new improved stuff.
Will you have
which
both hips replaced?
Well, I mean, I will. What I will end up doing is following the advice of the professionals, because that is I feel like that's a sensible thing to do.
And does it, like when your hips replaced, is that then cure? Like it's over, like you fixed it.
I mean, substantially, I could be much better. I mean, my quality of life may be much improved.
Only maybe.
Well, I mean,
doesn't the hip replacement actually fix the problem?
Well, the hip,
Yeah.
But because
you've got it in other places.
Because there are so many things around me. No, so many I mean, I can't go to yoga or Pilates really even because all my, my hamstrings and stuff are so, tight and everything's been compensating because of this pain and stuff. So, I mean, a lot of it will never come back just because everything else around it, but it will get me to a point where I can go and do yoga and Pilates and things like that and see what I can get back in my life.
How does that affect you as a man in your prime, having to be chronically ill and impaired like that? How's that been as a process in your head over that time?
It's funny. I mean, I think I adapt to things reasonably well. I think that's probably, probably sometimes too well, but it's probably also why I don't celebrate success as much as people would like sometimes. I don't like awards nights or, things like that. And I think it comes a little bit from the dairy farmer thing. It doesn't matter how well you milk the cows today. They might give you an award for milking the cows today, but guess what you got to do tomorrow? Milk the cows. And it doesn't matter if your hips hurt, the cows are still going to have to get milked tomorrow. And so I think certainly there's been an element of that in the way that I approach my life, which is I mean, when I wanted to go to America to, kind of pursue America, basically, I was just told by everybody, you can't do it. I mean, you've got this really successful thing going on here. You're going to have to maintain that, blah, blah, blah. There's just not enough time in 6 months of the year to go and do it properly. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to have to fit a year's worth into 6 months. And that's always been my approach. Now, sometimes what that means then is you just get through on your hips for a couple of years because you're too busy concentrating on other things to kind of pay attention to yourself. And you just go, well, sometimes it's going to hurt and sometimes I'm going to get off a plane and I won't be able to walk for a while, but you've done this for 10 years and you know how it all works and you can mostly manage it.
And you'll get through it.
And you'll get through it because you have other priorities. But then there gets to a point where you don't go, there is actually now a solution for the thing that I have where I could probably, I'm still at a point and age in my life where if it all works out and then I throw myself into rehab and putting myself back together, where my life could actually improve. I could literally improve substantially, perhaps for at least a decent amount of time. So that's certainly kind of a process. I'm trying to find some time and a place in my life where maybe I could get that done. Plus, new material out of that as well.
So much more.
I mean, I've already mined all the, my hips hurt stuff.
Yeah.
So now it's time to let's get an operation in and maybe fix the hips. That might be a whole new twist.
Going from being a big fish here in a small pond to being a tadpole in the massive pond that is America, what did that feel like? Because here you're a big deal. You're a seriously big deal. You're super famous. You get recognised everywhere. You sell out the Opera House. You're an A-list celebrity. What in you made you want to go and be the opposite of that after you'd worked so hard to get to this point? You could have just kicked back and enjoyed it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. But, I mean, firstly, I've never really considered myself to be a celebrity. You know, I don't go to things. You know, I don't go to openings. You won't see me at a movie premiere. I get asked to everything. You know, I mean, you get asked to everything, and you're not going to see me there, and you never have seen me there. You know,
But that doesn't mean you're not famous.
No, but I think there's a difference between the two. Like, I think if people know who I am, they know why they know it. You know? Like, if you know, I don't think I'm ubiquitous at a point. I think it's still the reason that so many people think I'm a Hilsey, because Hilsey's a little bit better known. So if you kind of just recognize me, you think I'm Hilsey. Whereas if you recognize me, like, you know, you go, yeah, you know, Wil from, and it's because of a reason. You know?
But I was watching a YouTube of you doing an interview with an American radio station, and it was some, you know, 2-bit whatever in wherever. And, you know, you're having to answer all these questions about Australia, and you did it with incredible good humour, and it was funny, and you were gracious and all of those things. But I just was looking at you going, are you just sitting there going, oh my God?
No, see, I love it. Like, I mean, the greatest thing that ever happened to me is going over there and starting again.
Because you got to be anonymous?
No, well, I mean, partly, I guess that's part of it. But, well, firstly, you get to decide, you get to actually get reassured whether you're funny or not. Because the truth of it is that I've been well known for long enough in Australia that I could go, well, they're only just coming to my shows because they like Glasshouse, or they listen to Triple J, or they, you know, like they are Gruen fans or whatever, you know. And it's hard to tell. But if I walk into a room full of strangers in Alaska or in Portland or in Denver or in New York or wherever, Bermuda I was in like a week ago, you know, doing shows. No one knows me there.
And so it's like a pure form of...
Right. So you just get to know if you're funny or not. And that's the truth, is the only thing that I'm interested in, is like, I'm not interested in this, like...
Being famous.
I've never been interested in being famous.
You just want to be funny.
I want to be the best comedian that I can possibly be.
Got it.
And with that comes, like, you know, you need audiences to do that. And hopefully if you're good at something, then people will come out and see it and support it and all those sort of things. But it's the only thing I'm interested in. It's the only thing I'm interested in.
And so now you live 6 months in LA and 6 months here?
Yeah.
How does that work?
I mean,
like the logistics of that.
I mean, back and forward, really. To be honest, it's not in.
But you have 2 houses.
Yeah, 2 houses. Well, I own one and I rent.
Sure,
in the US.
But you have 2 bases. Like, you have 2 homes.
I have 2 literal homes. Yes.
Yeah. And what about your animals?
Well, they stay here because they can't fly to America. Well, they can fly to America, but they can't get back in here. That's the problem. It's the Johnny Depp problem. I'd have to smuggle them in. I'd have to get Johnny and Amber back together to get the dogs back into Australia.
So then you've got to upkeep your house here and obviously have someone look after the animals and stuff when you're there.
Yeah.
And then you don't have animals there.
No, because then that would create the same problem.
And then even though you've got those 2 houses, you spend a huge amount of time on the road.
Yeah, most of it on the road. I mean, I'm really only in Sydney a couple of months a year. I'll probably, you know, like when we're doing Gruen, I'm here a bit. So
I would say,
what I want to ask, I'm in Sydney like 4 months a year, and then I'm in like LA probably 3 months of the year, and then I'm probably on the road the rest of the time.
So you know what I want to ask you now, which is, how do you maintain a relationship? I don't want to pry, but I want to ask, how do you maintain a relationship? You can't answer that.
I mean, I just
that moves around.
Well, I don't know. I mean, like, how does anyone maintain a relationship?
Well, you usually are in the same place. You live in the same place, and at a certain stage, you're usually living in the same house, and there's a kind of a, you know, you're together.
Right, but that's a pretty like normal way of looking at the world, you know. Right. Like, I mean, there are plenty of people who work in jobs. If you're a pilot, if you're like you know, whatever,
FIFO.
It's like, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's all sorts of
or people who go to war.
Yeah, you're in a band. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Like, there are plenty of jobs that rely.
Good answer without giving me an answer.
Mining, you know, as you said, like, it's one of those things where there's plenty of them, and people have to juggle these things all the time. And I often think that it's our expectations around. I mean, it's like this debate when it comes to merit in Parliament, right? Like, where they go, well, the reason there isn't, you know, we promote on women, there's only one woman in the cabinet, but it's all on merit. We're going, well, if you truly believe that's true, okay, if you believe that women and men are equally important voices in our society, like, if you truly believe that, like, if you don't truly believe it, then we can have a completely different conversation. But let's just assume that you believe that men and women, you know, let's use when they graduate university as a base point, even though this is just an arbitrary base point, but just for the sake of the argument, right? Women are graduating university at a higher rate than men in this country. So let's just assume on intelligence, on everything, on capability, that women are equally at base, at least equally competent as men too. And we would be better to have an equal amount of women and men, right? So if the system doesn't have an equal amount of women and men, you've then got to look at the system and go, well, maybe the problem isn't the women.
It's the
maybe
system.
the problem is we have a system set up that keeps these people out. And I think it's the same with relationships. I think a lot of the time the reasons relationships fail is people have this idea that this is how a relationship is. And if they can only see it in that way, then of course, yes, if somebody else is flying in for 2 weeks and then flying out for 2 weeks, then probably it's not what you want. But if you are not someone who thinks that a relationship has to be that sort of thing, maybe you're the sort of person that enjoys the 2 weeks when that other person's away, because the best thing is actually the 2 weeks when you're home.
Yeah.
You go out every night and you hang out all the time. But what happens is also then you have 2 weeks off where, you just go about your business and hang out with your girlfriends or boyfriends or, whatever, like.
I guess the key is finding someone who's on the same page as you and where you're both comfortable with that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
In any of those circumstances. I mean, that's the thing that I think we've...
Do you aspire to marriage? Because I was thinking just on what you're saying about those traditional kind of markers, and I sometimes talk to gay friends about that, and they say because in gay relationships there aren't those usual markers that there are in heterosexual relationships, which is engaged, get married, have a kid, have another kid. In gay relationships, it's kind of all bets are open. You can sort of choose your own adventure. Is marriage for you something that you aspire to, or are you very clear that, like kids, it's not something that makes a difference to your life one way or the other?
Yeah, that's the best way to put it, probably, is like I've always been very neutral on both of them, which is the idea that if I found myself in a relationship with somebody
who really wanted to get married.
Yeah, who really wanted to get married, or even like at some stage in my life, I think I'd have a different conversation now, because I do actually worry about bringing a child into the world in the state this world is in now. But at some stage in my life, it certainly would have been a discussion if they'd gone, I would like to have a child, and then I'd be like, oh yeah, well, I could have a kid. But it just wouldn't have been me wanting to initiate that. And it's the same with marriage. I have absolutely no desire to be married. Some of the best relationships that I have ever known in my life, and seen in my life and been surrounded by in my life, have been people who are not married. I have seen people in marriages who have terrible marriages, and yet at the same time my parents have been married for 44 years and is a great, and my brother and sister are both happily married.
So you're just neutral.
A good relationship is a good relationship, but whether you have a piece of paper, and particularly a piece of paper at the moment, I've been going to some friends' weddings, and they have to say that bit about it being just a man and a woman. It makes me actually hate marriage.
Yeah,
That's the one that makes me going. And it's that sort of thing going, well done for you guys for spoiling all these people's marriages. And a lot of people do something with it or acknowledge the moment or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm like, why would I want to be involved in this thing? Like, what benefit does it have for me in my life? Or, it just feels very old-fashioned to me, marriage. Like, it's just certainly not the way that I've lived my life.
Thank you.
We done? Is that it? Did I answer the questions?
You look fidgety now.
How long have we done? I've got another thing to do.
Yeah, it's 5 to 3. I've had you for a long time. You've got to go.
I've got to be home by 3:30.
All right. I'll let you go. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Critically Wil. Thanks for listening to No Filter. Find out more about Wil's new show, Critically Wil, at wilanderson.com.au. If you like this episode and want to hear more like it, we have more like it. You can scroll back through my feed and find my chat with Dave Hughes, for example. We talk about kids and comedy and why he got a vasectomy. Something that Wil might consider, since he doesn't want to ever have kids. You can buy any book mentioned on our podcast from iBooks at apple.co/mamamia. And this is where you can also subscribe to all our shows in one place. You can subscribe to my newsletter. All these subscriptions, they're all free. You can subscribe to my newsletter at miafreedman.com. And you can also download the Mamma Mia podcast app, not at miafreedman.com, but in the iTunes store. Can I ask a favour? When you're there, can you give this show a rating? Can you give No Filter a rating? If it was 5, I wouldn't be sad. If it was 4, I'll understand, because I'm not flawless like Beyonce. But By giving the show a rating and writing a review, that is how other people find the show, because that is how the Apple algorithm works to push it up into people's feeds and in their faces, and that helps us make more shows, quite literally. Today's show was produced by my co-pilot Eliza Ratliff for the Mamma Mia Women's Network, the executive producer of podcasts, the largest independent podcast network in Australia and the biggest women's podcast company in the world, Monique Boley. And the head of entertainment is Holly Wainwright, who is on leave at the moment writing a book. Gosh, we miss her. Anyway, the book's going to be amazing, and you'll be able to buy that at the iBooks Apple store soon too. I will see you next time. Remember, sharing is caring. Tell a friend. Lots of love. See you online. Bye.